We are back in open session. Thank you for your patience with us while we were in closed. And we'll now proceed to our two remaining committees for the day. Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools is up first. That committee is chaired by Miss Amy White. Ms. White.
Thank you so much, Chair Davis. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us into the afternoon hour. I'm Amy White, and I'm the chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. I want to thank my friend and colleague, Ms. Jill Kamnitz, for spending an abundant amount of time discussing the issues before us today. Before we talk about the 6 action items that we have on our agenda, I do want to take a special pause and mention to you an amazing event that happened on Tuesday, January 22nd. On Tuesday, January 22nd, a group of leaders, including members of the General Assembly, charter school leaders from 23 charter schools across our state, many parents, students, families, our own state superintendent, Catherine Truitt, and staff from the Office of Charter Schools gathered over at the General Assembly to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the North Carolina Charter School Law, HB 955. It's the charter school law that gave permission for the state of North Carolina to start the charter schools. Leaders supporting charter schools all agree that the state has seen unprecedented interest and growth in school choice popularity. In 1996, our General Assembly authorized the creation of these schools in our great state. Today, over 126,000 children attend 200 North Carolina charter schools, and approximately 80% of those 200 schools report a wait list. Of the many things that the pandemic has revealed in our state, it has mostly revealed consensus around the parental desire for the state to provide the best possible learning opportunity for their children. This year alone, the state saw significant increases in charter schools, in homeschooling, and in private school enrollment. It's no surprise that waiting lists for charter schools absolutely exploded. According to Dr. Terry Stoops of the John Locke Foundation, 23% of North Carolina families selected either a charter, private, or homeschool in the past year. It was my great pleasure to join in the celebration over at the General Assembly on the 22nd. As a longtime advocate of school choice and for excellence for all children, I am convinced more than ever that one size does not fit all. As leaders, looking back at a 25-year history in our great state, we must continue to push, we must continue to press, and we must continue to advocate for diversity in educational options in our state, such that students in every county, in every situation, have the educational freedom to select the school which best meets their academic needs. I would like to give the opportunity to Superintendent Catherine Truitt, and then if Dave Machado is on the line today to talk about this momentous and a wonderful occasion. Superintendent Truitt.
Superintendent, if you're talking, you're muted. I see she's on, Ms. White, but I can't seem to get her.
Is Mr. Machado prepared to make his remarks?
Yes, Ms. White, I am. Can you hear me, Deanna?
Yes, sir.
As someone that was involved in the start of a charter school 25 years ago, I'm extremely excited and proud of where the charter school movement is in North Carolina today. Our office recently presented the Charter School Annual Report to the State Board of Education, highlighting the growth and positive things happening in our 200 schools, serving over 126,000 students. So I'm not going to go over some of the great things that our schools are doing, but what I do want to mention today is the conversation that we had with 4 charter alumni after the 25th anniversary press conference several weeks ago. It was inspiring to listen to their story and how their charter school had a major influence on their success post-high school. 2 of the former students are working for their schools now. One of the former students' children attend his charter school. All 4 of these students, 3 of which are students of color, attributed their success to the teachers taking a genuine interest in their lives and well-being. And I know this happens in all PSUs across North Carolina, but what is notable is that these families had the ability to choose what school meets their children's needs the best. These families chose a school, they weren't assigned to that school. And we must continue to expand the opportunity for parents to continue to choose and also be intentional in making sure we're eliminating all barriers so more students have access to high quality schools of choice. I am very humble and very proud to be part of this very strong movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. Those who are listening, we are working on a technical issue with the superintendent. So while we're waiting to resolve that issue with the chair's approval, I'd love to go ahead and move to EICS 1, which is the final 2021 ready to open accommodations. Mr. Machado.
Thank you, Ms. White. We started the ready to open process a year ago with 10 schools in the planning year program. We have 9 recommendations. 1 school, Davis Charter Academy, voluntarily relinquished their charter, which you had already approved. We have 6 schools that the Charter School Advisory Board is unanimously recommending to open this fall. They are Peak, Asheville, and Buncombe County, which will open K2 with 102 students and will eventually be K8. Faith Academy in Rowan County is going to open up K7, 480 students. They will eventually be K12. Old Mainstream Academy in Robeson County, they're going to open K4, 196 students. They're approved for K8. Summit Creek Academy in Guilford County, K5, 520 students. They're approved for K8. Taylor Institute in Mecklenburg County, K3 with 250 students. They will eventually be K5. In Doral Academy in Wake County, will open K3, 200 students, and will eventually be K8. The Charter School Advisory Board is recommending that Saba in Chatham County move from a accelerated timeline to a regular timeline and open in August of 2022. They are also recommending that 2 schools not open due to their not successfully meeting the ready to open requirements, and that is CE Academy in Wake and Elaine Reddick in Hereford. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. And as has been mentioned previously before, an extensive amount of work goes into walking alongside these schools once an initial charter has been offered to the schools. The Office of Charter School walks a line aside to make sure that the schools are ready to open. So we take the recommendation not to open very, very seriously. Board members, you heard last month all of these recommendations, and you also heard the recommendation for 2 of the schools on our list not to be approved for approval to be ready to open this August. With that, and with the review and some additional concerns that were addressed to the board by the schools about that decision, some of that information has been placed on, or the information that we've received has been placed on eBoard for your review. We have developed some motions to be written into the record that articulate the board's desire and the legal substantiation not to approve. I'm going to have Dr. Townsend Smith to put those on eBoard now, if you'll refresh, so that you can see them. I will read them into the record, Mr. Chair, and then I'll open the floor for discussion. But I just want to make sure that the board understands that we'll be recommending approval for Ready to Open for all schools except for CE Academy and for Elaine Riddick. The recommendation for CE Academy is that we accept the recommendation of the Charter School Advisory Board that CE Academy be found not ready to open for the second successive year, and that the conditional charter agreement issued to CE Academy effective July the 1st on 2020 be revoked pursuant to GS 115C-218.95 subsection 4 for the material violation of the conditions, standards, or procedures set forth in the charter. Most specifically, the school has not demonstrated a threshold level of enrollment of students, with only 13 students being currently enrolled after 2 years of preparation, as required by General Statute 115C-218.1, subsection 13. The minimum number of students that must be enrolled in order for a charter school to open is 80. The school has also failed to obtain the required certificate of insurance and has failed to hire adequate staff, having claimed to have only one staff member hired, but failed to produce evidence of hire of even that one staff member being hired. That will be the recommendation, and I do apologize for its wording, but that will be the recommendation for CE Academy. And then the recommendation not to approve for Elaine Riddick Charter School will read as follows. I move that we accept the recommendation of the Charter School Advisory Board that Elaine Riddick Charter School not be moved to ready to open status after an unsuccessful planning year and another year of delay, and that the conditional charter agreement issued to Elaine Riddick Charter School effective July the 1st, 2020 be revoked pursuant to General Statute 115C-218.95 subsection 4 for material violation of the conditions, standards, or procedures set forth in the charter. Specifically, the school has not met the requirement of General Statute 115C-218.15 that it obtain federal tax exempt status within 24 months of the final approval of the application, which time has now expired without the school receiving such status. Also, the school did not timely secure and was unlikely to be able to secure before the start of school in August of 2021 an educational certificate of occupancy for the building it intended to use as a school. Those two motions now appear in eBoard for your review. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Mr. Machado about the other schools that have been recommended for approval and the two which have not been recommended?
This is Treasurer Falwell. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Not specific to the motion, but just wanted to let the board members know that one of my 21 duties and responsibilities is the sole fiduciary of the pension plan, and it's really important that all board members know that as we go through these entries and exits of charter schools, that we fully realize that some of these entities have opted to go into our defined benefit plan, and when they close, they have what we call a tail, T-A-I-L, of liability associated with those. And nothing related to this specific agenda item, but just to know that as the charter school group committee goes forward for them, if they can be the eyes and ears for the pension plan in terms of entrance and exits and liabilities that are then left for the rest of the people in the pension plan to pick up on. we would truly appreciate it. And not all charter schools are in the pension plan, and those that opt to exit, it's not Hotel California. You can check out and you can leave, but there's a cost associated with doing that. So thank you for giving me an opportunity just to say that, and hope people at the DPI and the Charter School Committee will always keep that in mind as we hear of charter schools either coming on board or, more importantly, exiting.
Thank you, Treasurer Falwell. Are there any other board members that have a question about these recommendations?
Ms. White, this is Alan Duncan.
Vice Chair Duncan.
School of the Arts for Boys in Chatham County. I'm not clear on the status of that now. Could you just
Mr. Machado, would you like to update Vice Chair Duncan on the decision to let Saba have a regular timeline?
Yes, as you remember, there was quite a bit of discussion about Saba being a single gender charter school, and we had to do some research to make sure that that was permissible. The school had to submit answers to 4 questions. That took several extra months, so they did not get off to the start as a lot of the other schools did. So they weren't quite ready to open when it came to their facility and their enrollment. So CSAB felt like, to be fair to that school, that they would just be moved from the accelerated application, which would have opened up this August, to a regular timeline. Will open up, the following August.
Okay, the reason I was asking just for clarification on this, my recollection is the rule had been passed if you tried for accelerated and you did not make it, that you actually had to sit out a period after that time. And because you'd had too many acceleration requests where people couldn't quite make it. I understand there's an effort here to be fair because there were some different circumstances. Have we set out, or has the committee set out, some clear written guidelines for when an exception might be made? Because as you start to walk down the exception road, that's a slippery path. It's usually helpful if there's some guidelines that are set out, so the board has that in mind, or alternatively, maybe our board should be setting out guidelines for when that can be adjusted because of circumstances such as this applicant encountered.
That is a great question, and that has been discussed both at the Office of Charter School and with CSAB leadership. We intend to come with a proposal for an accelerated procedure where we're not going down a slippery slope. But again, because of the circumstances that this school had, we've felt like giving them a little grace and opportunity to open up on a regular timeline was appropriate, because they did get off to a later start than the other schools. But your point's well taken, and yes, we will be proposing very clear guidelines for accelerated applications.
Mr. Machado, I just want to make sure I understood Vice Chair Duncan correctly, though. Saba was approved as an accelerated application, so the board actually made that approval. They were in their preparation to open phase, so I'm wondering if Vice Chair Duncan, you were confusing the decision. When a school is not approved for accelerated application, then they have to set it. This school was actually approved for acceleration, but because of the some of the legal implications and the degree to which we had to make sure every answer was given for the single-sex schools, we delayed them, but they actually were approved on the accelerated timeline. Just want to make sure that was that the intent of what your question?
Well, my question was, I realize they were approved on the accelerated timeline, but they're not ultimately going to be approved to go forward. So how does, given my understanding of the accelerated timeline, even if someone had been approved but they weren't ready to go forward, that would kick them back in the process? In fact, we tell people that who apply on the accelerated timeline. And so that's why I thought it would be important to have some discussion about what would our guidelines be for that situation. But I think I understood the timeline they were on, and agree that there were issues that came up that delayed them, you know, in terms of researching it. So that was the nature of my inquiry.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from board members? Okay, hearing none, let's move to EICS 2, the North Carolina Access Subgrantee recommendations. Mr. Jay Whalen is here to walk us through any questions that you might have. This was presented to you last month. Mr. Whalen?
Great, thank you, Ms. White, and good afternoon, board members. I do want to make two quick updates to the recommendations that have changed from last month. Based on the completion of the 2021 Ready to Open process and the recommendations you just heard, we would recommend moving School of the Arts for Boys, or SABA Academy, from the implementation only category into the planning and implementation category. The recommended funding amount would stay the same, but there are some differences in ways subgrantees can use funds in a planning year before the school is opened. So we would recommend moving them to that category. And the other change, which is just an informational change for you all, it doesn't affect this recommendation, is that with the acceptance of the recommendation to not move Elaine Riddick forward, they were an approved subgrantee during our second cycle. Their award would be terminated, and that funding would revert back to the NC Access program and be reallocated in a future subgrant cycle. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen, for anticipating that question about Elaine Riddick. Board members, do you have questions about the recommendations before you with regard to funding for the NC Access program? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to EICS 3. This is the 2022 Charter School Application Guideline. The Office of Charter Schools is proposing a change to the charter school application timeline beginning in 2022 to allow for some additional months to allow for operational planning. And so Mr. Machado is ready for questions if you have them. Questions from colleagues about the changes that have been proposed. I don't see any. I will tell you that this has been a discussion. In fact, Mr. Machado, if you'd like to add a couple of comments, but we really feel like that this will allow schools to be in the best place that they can be to be fully operational in a timeline. It just kickstarts their process. Mr. Machado, further comments?
Thank you, Ms. White. I think it's really important that we come up with a timeline that gives our schools a longer runway to open up, so we don't have as many requests for one-year delays. So we're trying to react to the situation that is happening out in the field. It comes to facilities, planning, zoning, everything. So this will give our schools 3, 4, 5 more months to get their school open. And the reason we're bringing this to you as early as we are is we have to meet the Rules Commission timeline that will have to look at this and approve it also. So again, we appreciate your attention to this request.
Thank you so much. Questions? Okay. EICS 4 is Doral Academy's request to implement a weighted lottery and to revise their enrollment projections. Mr. Machado.
Okay. Doral Academy, which is located in Wake County, is part of the NC Access program, and one of the stipulations obviously is a weighted lottery. Very pleased to say that their goal is 50% EDS student population implementing a weighted lottery, and they also want to decrease their enrollment from 500 to 270. This is based on their facility not being adequate to house the large number of students, and they have assured us that the building will be modified so they can accommodate what would be their third year of enrollment the following year.
Thank you so much for that update. Questions for Mr. Machado about the weighted lottery and the revised enrollment projection for Doral Academy? EICS 5 then is a Coastal Prep Academy's request to partner with an EMO. We heard this last month. Ms. Machado is available for questions about the recommendation for this school's choice for Charter 1 to become their educational management organization. Anybody have a question for Mr. Machado about Coastal Prep's request? Our last item today is EICS 6. This is Asheville Peak Charter Academy's request to revise its enrollment. The school is seeking a reduction from like 128 students down to 102. It's a reduction of 26 students. Does anyone have a question for Mr. Machado about this request? It's dealing with reduction in facility size. Hearing and seeing none, Mr. Chair, this concludes the report from the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee.
Thanks so much, Ms. White. We'll now move to our last committee of the day, the Business Operations Committee, and I recognize that chair, Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. On behalf of Todd Chastain, we represent the Biz Op Committee and have several items for decision by the board today. Our first item is Biz Op 1, which is contracts over $500,000. And in the spirit of giving some brief information on these very significant contracts, I think we have folks lined up to be 30 seconds to a minute in providing brief detail for each of our three items that are for contracts of this amount. You'll see the first one, for example, is over 3 years, is over $7 million. So let me ask, is it Melissa Davis who's going to take the Rethink Education proposal?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My sincere apologies for not using my camera this afternoon. I'm vacationing in a very remote location and the connectivity here is not very stable. So as for the contract amendment with RTI, the purpose of this amendment is to continue the implementation and program support that RTI is providing for the Rethink Ed program. RTI directly supported both the design of the Rethink program and the development of the grant proposal. They are named in the grant as the technical assistance subcontractor to NCDPI to support startup and implementation. We'll be in full implementation during year 2, which includes individualized support for our 45 Tier 1 PSUs and charter school networks. This work will include travel to districts to work with them on their customized plan. It will include project coordination, management, and support, as well as creating public-facing documents, parent guides, press releases, and various other communications.
All right, thank you. Unless there are any questions, we're going to keep moving through these, but please stop me if you have a question. Our next one is the Collier Technology Solutions Amendment. Is Dr. Harvey, do you have this one?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. This contract amendment is in support of the school nutrition technology system developed by Collier Technology Solutions. This software management system was originally competitively procured by the department in 2006 and has since been quite successful in helping manage various administrative functions of the statewide school nutrition program. This contract is frequently amended as needed to reflect the changes in federal regulations and guidance related to electronic program management and oversight. Now, the contract amendment before you today is required for two purposes. First, in 2019, the department was fortunate to receive a 3-year technology innovation grant to support improvements in program integrity, in the summer nutrition programs. Specifically, the grant enables the department to implement a system of meal counting and claiming using handheld electronic devices. Now, these devices promote improved accountability among our subrecipients, which, by the way, includes school food authorities and our local public school units, as well as nonprofit community sponsors. Now, what this means is that meals may be counted at the same time the child actually receives them, at the exact point of service. This eliminates the need for tick sheets or other primitive rosters or less reliable methods of meal counting. Now, the system also consolidates meals automatically and then prepares the school food authorities or public community sponsors' monthly claim for reimbursement. Now, this feature eliminates the risk of human error that often accompanies the counting of tick marks and other competing methods. Now, the second reason for the contract amendment is to enable the department to make the required enhancements to the software system that support the administration and oversight of the USDA pandemic waivers. And as you may recall, we're currently operating under 98 of those waivers. The program modifications in the system enable us to implement programs with fidelity as related to those waivers, while ensuring a robust dissemination of meals to children in the upcoming school year. And of course, these enhancements will help the division incorporate some internal controls to manage and mitigate any accountability risks. We will also incorporate additional business rules that help, again, strengthen the integrity of our overall program operation. Now, the contract amendment is in the amount of $400,215. All funds used to support this contract are federal school nutrition program funds. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey. And I want to highlight the need for this technical support and assistance in light of the accountability and auditing responsibilities with the federal funding that's being received, and the need for our children to receive meals, particularly during the pandemic, has become acute. So this becomes important technology for the entirety of our state in terms of being able to properly account for the good uses that are being made. So our last contract for over $500,000 is an IT approval to purchase, and this is, I think, Trey Michael has this item.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Good afternoon, all. As you have seen in the executive summary, this is the annual renewal for our Microsoft Imagine Academy agreement. This will be year 11. This contract provides software licenses, content, resources, and aligned industry recognized credentials to students in our Microsoft Imagine Academy. Traditionally, this contract has been at about $1.3 million, but this year, as we look to take a step back, do some discovery, research, and justification into the new Microsoft Fundamentals program that they will be offering next academic year, we're going to reduce that contract amount to just shy of $600,000 for this year.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Not
you.
hearing any questions, let's go on to BizOp item number 2, which is the Innovative Partnership Grant Competition recommendations. And I think Dr. Latricia Townsend has this item. Dr. Townsend?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'm excited today to present to you recommendations for the Innovative Partnership Grants. These grants are designed to support schools who are designated as Comprehensive Support and Improvement, or CSI, as outlined in our state ESSA plans. These discretionary funds enable awarded schools to engage in the school improvement process with an educational partner of their choosing. These funds actually come from the required 3% set aside from Title I, Part A. Schools are eligible for up to $500,000 per year for 3 years while engaged in this critical school improvement process. Now, let me share a little bit about our IPG process. We began our process by allowing schools who were CSI to submit an intent to apply form. We received 47 of those, and from those 47, we eventually received 22 applications. Those applications were reviewed by 3 impartial individuals, vetted by our partners at the Serve Center. we then averaged those to produce one score. And once we had that, we were able to add a series of priority points. And so if you were low performing or you were actually within a distressed county, you were able to receive additional points for your application. We moved into a process of using a regional approach. We took the top application per region. I will say there's a disclaimer. We did have one region from which we did not receive any applications. So we had 7 applications that were chosen by region, and then we were able to do a rank order in terms of highest score. And that left us with 13 applications, and we are actually recommending those 13 applications be funded to the tune of $4.75 million. And so on this chart, you will see a breakdown. In 2020, we had 102 entities that were considered CSI or designated as CSI. We currently are running this program, and we have 22 schools that have received this grant and are completing their first year of implementation. So that brought us to 80 schools who were actually eligible to apply. And of those 80, we did receive 22. And from that 22, we got down to 13. So continuing to winnow that down. And if we can move to the next slide. One of the things that we like to do is to ask why people are not choosing to apply for the money. And so a number of responses were received. We actually sent out a survey to ask about this. And so some schools felt that they had applied in the past and didn't receive funding for various grant programs, and so they weren't interested in putting themselves out there again. Some were already involved in too many other initiatives, and this would stretch them too thin. Some didn't have principal support. They just didn't want to apply. But I would say the vast majority of people really put it on the pandemic and the timing. Some felt that they had issues with, they already had district support in place. And so just a variety of reasons as to why they would not want to participate. And so here on this slide, I will not read it to you, but you will see highlighted the entities that were selected based on the regional competition, and then the others are there as well. And so again, 13 entities for $4.75 million. The next slide does show entities that applied but were not recommended for funding. And so continuing on, the last thing that I'll share with you is when you start to look at how things are going in terms of regional representation, I'm feeling pretty good about where we're getting. We are getting a good spread across those who are choosing to apply. North Central did have the most selected, however, they applied the most. And so that was in keeping with that. And then we show you the tier designation on the next slide. And so 8 of the participants we had were either in tier 1 or tier 2. So we're really hitting our target market, really making sure that we are really supporting our distressed counties. And then, as I said, this grant is called the Innovative Partnership Grant. And so the schools get to decide who they want to work with. They get to choose a vetted partner of their choosing to help them with the school improvement process. And so I've just given you information about who these schools are choosing to work with. That concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back to you, Vice Chair Duncan, to ask any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend.
You're welcome.
First note is that we have a lot of grants again this month on our agenda, and I think that highlights how important that survey is, at getting feedback about what are the reasons for not applying, and I think that feedback's valuable. applaud the work that's being done to continue to make these grants spread across the state and go to many of our districts that need the help but don't always have time to fill out with fidelity an application because of the very busy work they're already engaged in. So we need to continue that effort. But I really appreciate the work that's going into it. We just need to keep following through on it to the extent we deal with grants.
We
Are there any
will. And
questions?
well, and then
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, one point of privilege, I would like to share that we are in the process of developing a grant webinar series. And so it will be designed to help those who are a little more reticent to apply because they don't feel as if they have the know-how. And so we are hoping that that will be a big help in terms of getting some of those who don't apply, so that we're not just constantly funding the same people over and over.
Thank you. And thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Anyone have a question or comment here?
Vice Chair Duncan, just a brief point.
Please.
Just to send just a huge point of praise to Dr. Townsend for the fine work she does around incredible number of grants that are, I'm sure, very intricate. And I sat in on one of her webinars recently, and what an asset that is, because her staff does a very, very fine job walking the interested members in the audience through all the details. So just want to say thanks to Dr. Townsend.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's well-deserved praise. Thank you for saying that, Dr. Oxendine. All right, let's go on then to BizOp 3, Digital Learning Initiative Grants for Public School Units. This is under the direction of Dr. Stegall and Dr. Wren, but I think Lindsay Sipe and Julie Garganis will be our presenters here.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. This is Vanessa Wren. It's gonna be Lindsay and I
good.
today. And, but thank you for that. And good afternoon, board members and colleagues. It is my pleasure to once again bring to you the Digital Learning Initiative grants for your approval. These are the 2021-2022 grants. The grants have been in place now for 3 years, and our data is showing that they are effective in meeting the goals to integrate technology into instruction and improve student learning. Our evaluative data has shown that the grants have impacted significantly how educators are thinking and designing lessons and being intentional in their student experiences. I think it's notable to share that 98% of the grant awardees state that the grants have helped them make gains in student outcomes by increasing educator skill, increasing students' participation and engagement, and also student academic technology skills and employable technology skills, which we know is very important, particularly in the state of North Carolina. This grant cycle, we place a focus on personalized learning, coding, robotics, maker spaces, and augmented reality. And so we received many good proposals based off of those focus areas. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lindsay Sipe now. She is also the Southwest Regional Consultant, and she manages the grants, and she's going to share a little more about the PSU's proposals and the ones that were recommended for approval.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wren. Good afternoon, board members. Today, we're pleased to present the list of public school units that we're recommending to receive Digital Age Learning Initiative grant funding this year. This year, we received a total of 22 applications from across the state. As you may recall, for the 2021-2022 school year, we had an RFP for planning grants. The planning grants are intended to support public school units developing new digital teaching and learning initiatives within their districts. We believe that the recommended public school units represent the diverse applicant pool, a broad representation across the state, and they were identified by a team of evaluators in alignment with board policy for competitive grants. We are recommending 7 applications for planning grants this year. And again, those are 1-year grants for up to $50,000. We're also going to continue funding the 14 implementation grants, which were approved last year, and this is their 2nd year of funding, which is up to $75,000. On the next slide, you will see that I would like to highlight the additional focus areas that Dr. Wren touched on to ensure continued innovation for planning grants across North Carolina. So during the RFP process, we opened up the applications to focus on innovative practices through digital learning standards for students, or the digital learning competencies for teachers through the use of robotics, coding, augmented reality, virtual reality, makerspaces, and personalized learning. And we were really excited about the quality of grants that we received. Looking at the next slide, you're going to see that based upon available funding, we are recommending 7 of the 22 PSU applicants to be funded. Those PSUs being recommended include Brunswick, Dare County, Education Services for the Deaf and Blind, Mooresville Graded School District for Quemmons, and Randolph County. On the next 2 slides, I'm going to highlight the tremendous efforts and plan that have been recommended for each grant proposal. So first up, we have Kannapolis City Schools, and this grant proposal is to develop a PD Academy that's based on personalized professional learning aligned to the digital learning competencies for teachers and educators, and those educators are going to earn micro-credentials. Education Services for the Deaf and Blind wrote a grant proposal, and this work will develop a robotics program for deaf and blind students that's more accessible to all students and staff, and that students can use during their instructional time. And we have Brunswick County Schools. This grant proposal will provide additional maker spaces and strengthen the existing maker program within Brunswick County Schools. Lastly, on this slide, we have Mooresville Graded School District, and they will be working to provide a greater platform to provide STEAM education within the community and within their online academy. This initiative will provide a greater opportunity for families in Mooresville Graded School District to have exposure to STEAM outside in the community. On the next slide, you'll see that Dare County is proposing to provide an after-school Lego robotics program that's for students who have been identified in the MTSS support process. This program will be led by school-based tech facilitators and will continue to grow based upon a very well thought of sustainability model. Our Quemmons County Schools wrote a grant proposal that will work to form a personalized learning implementation team, a personalization quality at each school in grades K-8, and they're going to develop PL units of study. And then finally, we have Randolph County Schools, and this grant proposal is establishing makerspaces in 8 high schools. The digital teaching and learning teams will identify a team from each high school to become makerspace ambassadors, and those folks will take on leadership roles. The teams will participate in professional learning communities to develop lessons, share lessons, resources, project-based learning activities, and much more. On the next slide, you're going to see a visual breakdown of the recommendations for the public school units for the planning grant. This map just gives you a brief visual representation of the impact of DLI planning grants across the state of North Carolina for 2021-2022. And then finally, on the last slide, we have a visual breakdown of both the implementation grants and the planning grants for 2021-2022 school year. This map also gives a visual representation of impact. I want to take a moment to share that this map shows our dedication to ensuring equitable distribution and opportunities for all North Carolina public school units across the regions. We work diligently to utilize our regional case managers for dissemination of the opportunities, as well as digital teaching and learning consultants that have great relationships with the technical contacts and CTOs and technology directors across the state. We also provided technical webinars that provide a deeper knowledge and understanding of the RFP and the requirements of the grant itself, as well as regional office hours for all PSUs that needed additional support for grant writing or this grant in general. During fall of 2020, the digital teaching and learning team also identified a gap within the grant writing skills component. And as a result, we have contracted grant support work with the Friday Institute, and they've built a customized Canvas course with wraparound services and grant writing assistance. So that wraparound course is available to all public school units that are interested in participating. So thank you so much for your support of the Digital Age Learning Initiative and the work that's occurring across the state of North Carolina. We're very much looking forward to the continuation of the DLI grants. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there questions or comments on this presentation? All right, not hearing any, we'll go on then to BizOp 4, which is the approval of Education and Workforce Innovation Commission grant recommendations. These come to us from the Education Workforce Education and Workforce Innovation Commission, often referred to as EWIC. And I believe our presenter is Jacqueline Wyatt today.
Yes, good afternoon, Superintendent Truitt, Chairman Davis, and members of the board. And thank you for that introduction. My name is Jacqueline Wyatt, and I work in the Career and Technical Education Division. Today, I speak to you on behalf of the Education and Workforce Innovation Commission, or colloquially known as EWIC. So we have lots of acronyms. That's our first one. All right, so the purpose of the commission is to develop and administer the Career and Technical Education 6th and 7th grade expansion grant, also known as the expansion grant, and the Education and Workforce Innovation Program Fund. So both of these grants are CTE centered and focus on graduating more students college and career ready. The Great Expansion Grant in particular, which is also the purpose of my speaking to you today, is specifically focused on providing additional funding to the public school units or to public school units in order to hire additional licensed CTE personnel for the purposes of the inclusion of career education for students in 6th and 7th grade. The EWIF grant, per legislation, functions independently of the North Carolina State Board of Education. So this is the other grant that the EWIC administers. But the Great Expansion Grant is intended to be administered in coordination with the state board. All right, so the commission consists of 14 members. You have the Secretary of Commerce, or the designee for that person, the chair of the State Board of Education, or designee, the president of the University of North Carolina, or designee, the president of the North Carolina Community College System, or designee, and then 3 members appointed by the governor who have experience in education, 3 members appointed by the General Assembly upon recommendation of the Speaker of the House of Representatives who have experience specifically in business operating in North Carolina, and then 3 appointed members by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the President of the Senate who have experience in business operating in North Carolina. So as you can see, there's sort of a trend with making sure we have that business aspect to these grants. We really want to connect the business and industry to our CTE courses. And next slide, thank you. So the current members of the EWIC Commission are listed here. Here you can see their name and their title and their designating or appointing office. All of the members who have been appointed by either the House, the governor, or the Senate, those folks cannot send designees, but all other folks can send designees, which is the trend. Notice that there are 2 vacant seats, both of which are appointed by the Speaker of the House. So we are waiting for those to be filled. Next slide, thank you so much. All right, so let's take a deeper dive into the expansion grant, which is why I'm here today. So this grant was established to expand CTE programs by prioritizing the inclusion of students in 6th and 7th grades. The funds are available to CTE programs in public school units to employ additional licensed personnel, such as CTE teachers, career development coordinators, and other CTE support services. This grant serves students by allowing PSUs to hire more folks, right? The grant is currently not available to charter schools. All right, so per legislation, the commission shall recommend recipients of the grant to the State Board of Education for approval. The State Board, upon consultation with the Superintendent of Public Instruction, shall approve recipients of grant awards. So now let's talk about the consideration of factors in awarding grants. Before receiving funding, an applicant must display each of these 4 aspects in their grant proposals. This list is taken directly from the legislation. So they have to show a plan for expansion of the CTE program specifically to 6th and 7th grade students, the significance of CTE in their local administrative unit, and how a grade expansion would enhance the education program and the community. Number 2, a request for the amount of funds, a description of how the funds will be used, and any other sources of funds available to accomplish the purposes of this program. Number 3, a proposed budget for 7 years that provides detail on the use of the amount of funds to add personnel, increase career development efforts, and provide support services. And lastly, a strategy to achieve meaningful analysis of program outcomes due to the receipt of grant funds under this section. All right, so this grant is unlike the other EWIC grant in that the respective legislation states that grantees from the previous grant year shall receive priority in the funding process for the current year. This means that the original 28 grantees will receive priority in the application scoring process for each year they reapply. That's an important aspect of this grant. I'll talk more about that in a second. We could please, thank you. So for the grant parameters of this particular grant, we're in year 4 of the 7 years intended by the General Assembly. However, the current EWIC Commission, which is comprised of new members from 2019, is in its 2nd grant cycle. So they sort of put their minds together and said, we know that, you know, we have 5 years left of the 7 when they came on. How can we best serve the state? So the first year around 2019-20 and 2020-21 was 1 grant cycle. They're doing these grant cycles in 2 years each. So now we're going to be moving into the 2021-22 and 2022-23 grant cycle. This means that recommendations being made to you today are for the upcoming 2 years, and they are all applicants who received the grant in the previous cycle. And the maximum that each LEA may apply for is $50,000. So this year, the grant became a bit more competitive. Historically speaking, the EWIC Commission had about $1.4 million to allot to grantees, though this year the EWIC Commission has roughly $1.17 million due to changes in legislation. All right, so let's see. Per legislation, the EWIC formed a joint scoring committee to score applications. Each scorer is either a commission member, a representative from the North Carolina Career and Technical Education Foundation, or DPI staff to the EWIC Commission. Each application was scored by 3 education professionals, producing fair and average final scores for each applicant. And the EWIC Commission generated a rigorous scoring rubric based on legislation or legislative consideration of factors in awarding grants. So they really did, and I can't stress this enough, the EWIC Commission really came together this past year to figure out how best they can formulate an application process and an application scoring process that's fair and equitable and reaches as many folks as possible. All right, so there were 38 complete applications submitted for this competitive grant. The EWIC Commission, though, had $1.17 million to award. So with that and the average amount applied for being the full $50,000, the Commission could award up to 23 applicants. After some discussion on the applications, the legislation, and the grant parameters, the Commission is recommending to you all today to award the top 23 scoring applications for the upcoming grant cycle. So let's see, next slide, thank you so much. So these are the grant recipients for 2019-20 and 2020-21. the amounts, and their state board regions. And then if we go to the next slide, these are the recommendations. So given the decreased amount of funds and increased competitive nature of the grant application process for the upcoming grant cycle, these are the top 23 applicants the Education and Workforce Innovation Commission recommends the State Board of Education approve for awarding. Each of these applicants are previous recipients. It is worth noting that the Commission did not come to this decision lightly. There was much discussion on the matter. Ultimately, the Commission trusted the scoring process. The education professionals who scored the applications and the rubric generated directly from respective legislation in their final decision to recommend these top scoring 23 applicants to you all today. So thank you for your time. I know I took a bit of it, but I am now happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Jacqueline, thank you for this excellent report. One very quick question. The total was 1.17 and we allocated out 1.15. What happened to the other $20,000?
That is a great question, and the Commission did discuss this at length. They discussed potentially partially funding someone, and actually went back and forth with folks in the field this time around and trying to figure out what would be best. So at one point they had even voted on and were moving on awarding as many folks as possible with an average of 35,000 to 50,000 instead of just giving out the full 50. And what we got back from the field was an outstanding response saying, no, we can't do that, because the way they handle the financial aspect of this is they need the full 50. A lot of them are already supplementing anyways, because a lot of these positions, these folks are not only being paid the 50,000. So a lot of these folks are being paid 50, 60, 70,000. And so PSUs are already having to supplement the funding. So they told us, if you only give us 35, we can't even fund this position at all. The 35 would be rendered useless. So the 20,000 will not be utilized this grant cycle.
Well, rather than have that money revert, if there's a way we can find that we could usefully use it where somebody could make good use of it, I certainly think that would be, something the board would support. If there's some resources there that would help in this area, we would want to use those. But it's a great report, very thorough. Are there any questions or comments? All right, not hearing any. Jacqueline, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go on to BizOp 5. Alexis Schaus has this, and this is a pretty much an annual, relatively routine matter. And Alexis, I think you can get us through this one quickly.
Yes, sir. So this is an annual request, and it's made in years that the state budget process is delayed. And we are requesting pre-approval from the state board to authorize Financial and Business Services to implement the budget and modify funding formulas in order to allocate the funds to the public school units and implement new legislation on the effective date. The Division of School Business within the Financial and Business Services area has 10 days from the signing of the budget to allocate the initial allotments to the school districts. And waiting for state board approval after the budget is signed doesn't allow us to enough time to meet this requirement. So historically, the items that are affected include legislated salary increases, pay structure changes, class size changes, allotment funding factors, budget flexibility changes, and changes to existing funding formulas. Items that are competitive grants or require a new funding formula will be brought to the board for approval prior to the implementation. So this is only really those routine items that are stipulated in law.
All right, very good. Thank you. Again, this is an annual adjustment we make to help facilitate the new budget as it comes into place. So are there any questions or comments on this? All right, not hearing any. We have BizOp. Did I hear something? I'm sorry. Not hearing any, then we have BizOp 6, which is another annual item. This is I think Lynn Harvey can take us through this one. Dr. Harvey can take us through this pretty quickly. This is the annual United States Department of Agricultural Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Grant, which is always good news for our schools and students. And it's also good news for the farmers in North Carolina, who very much are part of this grant, in the sense that they're the suppliers of the food that's used with this grant money. So, Dr. Harvey.
Thank you, sir. This is indeed good news, and this is the 18th year the department has received the USDA Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program grant, the purpose of which is to, as you mentioned, create a healthier school environment by offering more fruits and vegetables as snacks at no cost to students in elementary schools. And this, of course, in lieu of other less nutrient-dense snack foods that kids are often exposed to. It's also to increase the overall consumption of fruits and vegetables among young children and to support locally grown agricultural products. Research tells us that teaching young children to develop healthful food habits early in life will hopefully mean those food habits go with them into adolescence and then ultimately into adulthood, making this sort of a public health program. Now, the department has been awarded for the coming year $5.7 million for elementary schools. All elementary schools are eligible to apply. However, federal guidance requires schools with the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students be given priority for participation in the program. The reason for this, it is assumed students enrolled in these schools generally have fewer opportunities to consume fresh fruits and vegetables on a regular basis. Now, the selection criteria are prescribed for us in federal regulations. Specifically, elementary schools are ranked from the highest to the lowest percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged. Then the available funds are allocated to the schools in rank order based on actual student enrollment, and the funds are distributed until they're exhausted. An application is required of each elementary school that would like to participate. The application is a formality, but it's needed to primarily show commitment at the school level to support the program, especially given the integration of this program into the instructional day. We are very pleased to inform you that all 220 schools that applied for the program this year will be funded, and all education regions are represented. Now, the amount of funding is approximately $64 per pupil, and ideally these funds will be used to purchase as many fresh, locally grown, fresh fruits and vegetables as possible. Now, keeping in mind, these items are to be used only as snacks in the school day. They are not used as part of the school breakfast or lunch program. Now, to that end, fruits and vegetables are made available to students in kiosks in the hallway, or they're delivered to the classroom daily. My personal favorite is the delivery method that enables kindergarten students to go to the school dining room and pick up their little red wagon, quite literally, filled with the day's fresh produce, bring the snack back, return it to the classroom, and share with all of their peers. And this year, to promote the superintendent's and the board's literacy goals, we're working with various stakeholders and elementary schools to provide fresh fruit and vegetable fact sheets. This supports teachers as they help students read more about fresh fruits and vegetables. And in doing so, we hope students will continue to learn as much as possible about them. So ultimately, this program helps us achieve our mission of nourishing students' bodies, minds, and souls. Thank you for the opportunity to share this good news today.
Thank you, Dr. Harvey, and indeed is good news. Are there any questions or comments on this? All right, thank you. Not hearing any, let's go on to update on contracts. I have not gotten any questions on either the executed contracts report or the planned contracts report. So if you have any, please speak now, or we're going to keep moving. Okay, not hearing anything on the agency vacancy report. I'm sorry, David, was that you? No.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Yes.
You have a discussion item?
Yes, I'm sorry. And our discussion item today is about the establishment of school bus routes, the transportation technology consideration. And let me just say as a prelude, this is a complicated subject, and I don't think we have time to get into it as thoroughly as we would want to. We had planned that this might happen, so Kevin Harrison's going to give us a very brief overview of what the topic is, and we're instead going to spend, at our next meeting in August, we're going to set aside additional time to allow Kevin to go into greater detail about the complexities of this issue and the things that we need to deal with as a board. So Kevin, if you could just give the quick overview today, we'll allot additional time for sure at our next meeting.
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a policy amendment related to the establishment of school bus routes. And this policy amendment is related to the Transportation Information Management System, TIMS, which is the software we use to put school bus routes into plans, the public school units, I should say, use. Some background, it was originally funded as part of Department of Energy grants for the reduction of the use of fossil fuels in the state back in the 1980s. And its implementation, once funded, was mandated by 115C240D and by no later than September 1st, 1992, for the 92-93 school year. But it began as early as 1986, and study of it occurred in the early 1980s. TIMS looks a little bit like this now, this is just 3 bus routes at an elementary school north of Lake Hickory. Of course, it started out in DOS and eventually has over the years been upgraded to newer systems. This is the Windows-based one. On the next slide, you see some other uses for it, or you can see a close-up overview, satellite overlay of what your bus route might look like and where the stops are and where the students are that are going to those stops. You also see on the left-hand side there, boundary planning, where you might decide how to close or reopen or open new schools, close existing schools, and how many kids that's going to leave you within each location. So there's some ongoing costs to the system. But as you might imagine, software in the 1980s was a little different than software is now. We have a statewide site license for the current software underlying the TIMS system, which is Edgelog. And there are no recurring costs for that system. There was an initial cost, and there were upgrade costs in about year 15 and year 25. But there are no recurring costs year after year. The current costs are approximately $450,000 per year only for staff at 2 universities, UNC Charlotte and North Carolina State University, who have provided training and support to PSU staff in how to use this software, as well as data analysis and report production for DPI. So they gather all the information from the PSUs about their buses and routes, students, and report it back to DPI, aggregate DPI. And then districts may have ongoing costs for other things, but like GPS units, camera systems, anything real time is especially expensive, but those are paid for out of PSU, state and local transportation funds. The recurring cost of the state is only for personnel to support it. We use this data for planning school bus routes. Also, PSUs use the data for that, safe and efficient school bus routes. Things like making sure that children don't cross roads here or buses don't go on this road. Various different things, but safe and efficient school bus routes. In addition to that, attendance planning and analysis, as I mentioned earlier. The department uses it for equitable distribution of transportation funding. We were directed to use an efficiency-based funding formula by the General Assembly back in the early 90s or so. This is the system that enables us to have information that can support that type of funding. Students, which ones are riding, their distance to the schools that they're going to, and it also provides cross-verification with other state reports, such as the bus drivers and the number of students being transported each day. We also pick up service metrics for publishing, such as ride time, distance, students are walking from their home to their bus stop, and how early they're arriving at school. Do they get there at 7:30 for a school that starts at 8:30, or do they get there much more tight to the school bell times? Depends. Those service metrics we publish as well. So that is our use of the data. So we're asking to revise Transportation Policy TRAN-002. In the primary goals of this revision is to define what implementing means in the requirement to implement it, which is that they must establish routes in the Transportation Information Management System. Highlight that there's a lot of local discretion here. They can procure and utilize any additional technologies or even an entirely new routing system if they want to, at their discretion, as long as they continue to use TIMS. And outline how we would approve equivalent systems. In brief, the PSU superintendent can request it. DPI would evaluate and recommend to the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education could approve or disapprove. And then if they approve, the PSU could discontinue use of TIMS at that point because their system had been approved as equivalent. In more detail on equivalency in the policy, it contains policy level equivalency criteria, which would be that they get information from the Student Information Management System like we expected. They assist the school district in developing those safe and sufficient school bus routes, and that they output standard reports and data elements that we have received for decades so that we can continue to get those. Also, supporting that policy level equivalency criteria, there would be background and process document to tell more about the process and what the steps literally are, like issue a request to DPI that contains X things. And that was included in the materials, but also a detailed specification requirements for the elements above. Things like the student information system data imports first field is the UID of the student. That is a number. It is at least, X characters long. Okay, that type of detailed specification as well. And then there would be a recommendation to the State Board of Education once equivalency was determined, and notification to the PSU of equivalency subject to continued successful state reporting, as long as they continue to send us the information that's needed. And from there, we have to look into the future. We have currently and into the future. I'm starting with into the future with mid to long-term goals, where we would like to develop a single specifications document, one document that holds all of the information. The development of a data storage, mining, and reporting capabilities. So right now, the PSUs just report data on reports. That report might be K through 12 student ridership, only those who are riding buses in the afternoon, and what those routes are. Okay, you might have a report like that. But in the long-term future, or the mid to long term, we want to develop a way to look at that more broadly and just collect the data and worry about what the data says and the reporting capabilities after we have received the data. That would allow us to develop all kinds of different reports, whatever is needed. Also important to note is that there's a pilot program presently ongoing with Mount Airy City Schools. And so we anticipate over the next few years to have results from the GA created pilot program in Mount Airy, utilizing a new routing system and a lot of cool technology, to be honest. GPS, student tracking, turn-by-turn directions for drivers on tablets, all sorts of fun things. And depending on the results of that study, we'd like to make recommendations to the State Board of Education and the General Assembly regarding how we think this baseline program that we have, which is designed to create the plan for the school bus route, can move into the future and contain additional features potentially that are useful to PSUs in the modern era. Maybe everybody needs GPS. Maybe everybody needs turn-by-turn directions. That's what we hope to get out of the pilot program in Mount Airy City Schools. And then depending on how that goes, there could be an RFP in the future for either a new TIMS or a convenience contract for PSUs, depending on who's funding it. But until we have all of that, we want to deal with those current requests, which is any PSU seeking to use a different system like Mount Airy in the current scheme. And we would use there's only one instance where this has ever occurred before. It was in Nash County in 2011. So we do have an SBE approved 2011 for Nash County. So we'll use those documents as a guide until then, but it is a little more complicated. I'd reference we wanted that single document. This right now is multiple documents. There's a lot of cross-referencing you have to do between those documents. And we're getting reports. As I mentioned, reports instead of data, reports they have to apply filters like, well, we don't want pre-K students in this report, or we only want student riders, not all students in this report. Whereas data, we would just get it all and sort it out once it got here, which makes it much simpler for the districts and much simpler from an IT perspective as well. And then recommendations to be brought to the State Board of Education as the DPI staff are satisfied with the existing criteria are met. So as we get those proper reports that we've always received in the format that we've received them in the past, we want to make sure that we can still continue to get those and that the information is good. The new policy we have proposed allows both of these things to occur. It allows the handling of existing requests and requests in the future under a more IT-centric, very specific format. And so if you have any questions.
Well, I'm going to cut off questions today because today
All
is
right.
a good overview of the complexity of the issues, and the issues are complex. But that's a great explanation you gave, Kevin. Thank you for that very much. And we will pick this up further at our next meeting to continue to move this issue forward. We have just 2 or 3 more items. The agency vacancy report. We're not going to cover this month other than to say Ron Paxton and his team are working on filling the 24 slots the board recently approved. And so that, of course, affects, and we saw last month, that affects the vacancy report, but they're hard at work in getting the necessary approval on that effort. On our monthly budget report, Alexis, do you have anything to report this month on that? I'm going to take that as a no. And then we have the learning, recovery, and acceleration update. Michael Maher, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
All right, so we're under a little bit of a time gun. Can you compress reasonably a report on this very important subject? I don't mean to make it sound like it's not important, because it's incredibly important.
Absolutely. I'll move as quickly as I can. Good afternoon. I know it's been a long afternoon, so I'll try to move through this quickly and succinctly as possible. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our roadmap to recovery and acceleration. I'll give you a brief update on how we are looking to convert the ARP template, which was approved at the last board meeting, and convert that to what we're calling a roadmap to recovery and acceleration. It's what I believe to be perhaps a more user-friendly, viewer-friendly version of our long-term plan, as well as capturing how we have spent ESSER funds and the impacts of those funds. So I will briefly cover a CARES Act update, SRSA update, ARP update, and then talk a little bit about the ESSER 3 budget and perhaps some future considerations. So as I mentioned, we began with the ARP template, which we submitted to the U.S. Department of Education, and are now looking to convert that to essentially a living document that will be regularly updated as we garner additional information. That template included our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and our use of various ESSER funds. Our roadmap to recovery will include not only those components, but also include a plan for ESSER 3 and then some of the long-term evaluations that'll go on as we begin to spend some of those funds. I believe in the board documents, there's a draft, the most recent draft version of this, so you can look at that, and I'll provide regular updates as that draft gets updated and further completed. But what you'll find is an introduction, the initial response, and then 3 current sections, the CARES Act, the SRSA Act, and then the ARP, and then a little bit about the Office of Learning and Recovery's role in planning, research, and evaluation. Okay. And so where are we now? So the work that I've engaged in the last couple of weeks has really been around trying to capture how some of our federal funds have been spent over the last year. So I've begun looking at some of the initial CARES Act expenditures, and we're really talking about the state reserve or the agency holdback funds. And so I now have some information about district and regional support in that document, instructional support partnerships, which was the UNCTV program, as well as professional development for K-12 teachers. You'll see there are a couple other pieces there that I'm still working on collecting information about those, and then building out a review of the impact of those will be forthcoming. We'll go to the next one. So additionally, under the SRSA, you'll see we had a number of investments that are all ongoing. So currently, school extension CBA is complete, and Ms. Barber presented that this afternoon. So that will be filled out, as well as the COVID-19 impacts research, and then letters training. And of course, what I'm doing here is contacting essentially the business owners for each of these items and then pulling out whatever research reports or evaluations were done, and then trying to pull those together in one kind of consistent format and place so that we can have a thorough review of all of the different expenditures. And my long-term goal is to be able to look across each of these categories, whether it's CARES or SURSA or ARP, and not only have an individual evaluation of each of the spending programs, but in fact look at on a broader scale what was the impact of, for example, CARES Act funding overall with whatever metrics we might have available. And then where are we now? So I'm currently working with Dr. Howard and her team, the accountability unit, as well as some others within here inside of NCDPI. So to look at some of our baseline metrics, which we are going to use going forward to evaluate lost instructional time for students, K-12 students. I'm also working to develop some alternative budget considerations based on the impending state budget, which has our ESSER 3 allocation, as well as developing a new framework that will align with those budget parameters that end up being put in place as a result of the state budget. Okay. So next. Okay, so I know Mr. McKinney provided some of what was found in the Senate and the House versions, and so I want to kind of put together an overlapping view of what we recommended to the state board, and then what was in the House and Senate appropriations in each of their bills. So we, of course, these are some of the high-level pieces. We asked for roughly $60 million in after-school enrichment, and the House and Senate have funded that at 36 and 36. High-impact tutoring, we recommended 30 million. You can see 13 and 10 in the House and Senate. Mastery-based programs and assessments, 19 million. The House put 10 million in, and the Senate did not include this. A K-5 LMS and science of reading, that is funded at 47. We recommended, and that's what we found in each of those budget considerations. For research partners, we asked for 2.5 million. The House and Senate currently appropriated $1 million. And then, of course, contracts for asset and CTE programs. So you can see these were kind of the overlapping pieces. On the next slide, you can see the items that we recommended to the board that were not funded in either the House or the Senate appropriations bills. So low-performing district regional support, we asked for 38 million, and that is currently not being funded. And then, rather than me read this, I'll let you kind of look through. But I think the big part here that I actually, if we can go to the next slide. And then these were inclusions that the House and Senate put in that essentially we didn't necessarily ask for. I think the takeaway here is what we've seen in the House and Senate are not entirely consistent with what we've asked for. It also makes it somewhat difficult to build out a true plan for using these funds in a consistent and coherent way. So, you know, essentially we're hoping that we end up with a little more funding in the categories that we have recommended. If we can go to the next slide. So, and one more, please. Thank you. So honestly, what's happening now is, of course, learning recovery and acceleration. I'm working on this long-term framework to try to evaluate learning recovery, but I have to do that within the budget considerations or the budget parameters that are given to us once this money is appropriated. So the plan going forward is I will continue to work on evaluating CARES and SURSA programs. Additionally, as it becomes clear which of these items will be funded, I'll bring to the board a new framework that looks at our priorities and then how we might evaluate those against the learning recovery needs of the state. And then my office, of course, is committed to performance outcomes and looking at the different programs. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what's happening with long-term planning. I'd be happy to answer any questions if we have time. I know you're stuck for time here.
Well, thank you for that excellent report. And obviously, you're dealing with some really incredibly important issues, and it's difficult. The runway is got some obstacles along the way to get to where you want to go. So appreciative of this report and all the work that you and your colleagues are doing. Are there questions or comments on this? As late as we are, if someone has one, this is important enough that we could pause for a moment and make sure you get your question answered.
Vice Chair Duncan, it's Catherine.
Yes.
I just wanted to highlight that Dr. Marr and the Legislative Affairs team will continue to have conversations with the General Assembly to make clear our recommendations for the DPI holdback funding, and whether or not our those conversations are fruitful, time will tell.
Well, the efforts are important, so thank you, thank your team, and obviously thank Dr. Maher and his team for all the work that's being done to generate the approaches that we think will work best and to try to get the support form that we need.
Yes, sir.
So thank
And I did just want to mention that, you know, once the budget's final and we have the appropriation, we'll pivot. My office will pivot very quickly into developing a framework and working towards some meaningful outcomes.
Very good. All right. Well, happily, that concludes the report of the BizOp committee today. Thank you to everyone on our staff who made these presentations and their colleagues who helped to prepare them. This was very well done. We're appreciative of it. Chair Davis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. We do have one update going back to EICS. I'll call on Ms. White for a brief update on EICS 3. Ms. White.
Thank you so much, Chair Davis. Let me get back to the exact wording on that. Board members, because the change in the charter school timeline does require a, I'm so sorry, my screen. I want to make sure I read this correctly. Chair Davis, give me one quick second.
And I think Dr.
Okay.
Townsend-Smith has it up on the screen.
She does. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So colleagues, because the wording is important, because this particular change does need to go back before the Rules Commission, I wanted to bring your attention to the updated recommendation. Let me read that into the record. So the recommendation for EICS 3 for the change in the charter school timeline says the Charter School Advisory Board recommends that the State Board of Education approve the change in 16 NCAC 06G.0508 from July to April, and that we approve the April deadline for 2022. If we'll approve that as written, we should be in compliance with the necessary steps that need to be taken in order to go to the rulemaking process. Thanks so much for letting me draw attention to that.
Hey, Ms. White, any questions on that item before we depart it? Very good. Hearing none. Thank you for that. Colleagues, that concludes our committee reports. We do have one final update, and this concerns an update around our rules responsibilities, and I'll turn to Mr. Brandon Walker in our General Counsel office for this update. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I can make this really quick because Tom Zyko did a really nice job presenting the information last month regarding our decennial rule review. And just a brief summary, what we're tasked with completing is determining necessary versus unnecessary rules of our rules that have been on the books since 2014. With that said, we've developed a schedule to get us through this process. The schedule is looking to be adopted by the Rules Review Commission July 15th, so next week at their meeting. What's on the screen in front of everybody is the revised schedule. And in our work with our counterparts at the Rules Review Commission, they've actually given us some more time. So this is about a month. We have an extra month built into this schedule than what was presented last month. It's really important to highlight that once this schedule is approved by both the State Board and the Rules Review Commission, it's imperative that we meet these dates because it builds off of each other, with the ultimate goal of meeting a February 15th final report to OAH. But if I think that's a pretty succinct summary. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything that comes up.
Mr. Walker, questions from my colleagues on this item?
Chair Davis, I have a very quick question. I know that we're running out of time, so I'll be quick. I might have missed some of your discussion because I lost connectivity for momentarily. Talk to me briefly about the volume of work we're talking about here. I'm not turning on my video because I'm having problems with connection.
No problem. This is going to be a large project, especially for our staff, but it's in really two parts. And this first part that we're talking about here today is the easier part. What our task is at this point of the game is to determine which rules are necessary or actually which rules are unnecessary. Because if they're unnecessary, they're going to come off the books. If they're, by definition, if they're not unnecessary, then they are necessary, and then they'll have to go through the readoption process. And that's where the real heavy lifting is going to start, because it's going to be more akin to the permanent rule processes that we've gone through before. But this one is really a quick look at what we have and what rules are. I mean, our staff should be familiar with what rules that they're using on a daily basis and what rules that they haven't seen or implemented in many, many years. And those are the rules that we're after, to just deem them unnecessary. And it's a quick process to remove them from the books.
I see. So it's really a lot of the work up front will be analysis, making decisions. Is that right?
Correct. And then down the road, once we get through making this identification of unnecessary rules, then we'll have to readopt the rules that we have determined to be necessary. And with that is going to come a lot of changes, public comments, and those sorts of things that tend to slow down the process.
Very good. Thank you very much. That's the answer, the kind of answer I was after.
Absolutely.
The questions? Terrific. Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Appreciate your good work on this.
Absolutely.
Colleagues, this brings to a close our committee reports and updates. And we'll now move to our action on first read agenda. Is there any request to remove an item from our action agenda for separate consideration? Hearing none, at this time, I ask if there's a request for a motion for the following items, to approve the following items: the June 2nd and 3rd, 2021 meeting minutes, the June 17, 2021 meeting minutes, the rules, the CAMEL review schedule as just presented, and the following items from your committee reports: SLA 2, EICS 1 through 6, BizOp 1 through 6, ES&P 1, the IPL and ILT licensure approvals discussed in closed session, and the recommendations for personnel hires at the Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf for one-year contracts for the following employees: Judith Squires, Hannah Fuller, Shannon Sutton, and Haley Joyner. And then finally, the superintendent's recommendation for hiring of the ISD principal, Miss Isabel Jones, to serve as principal at Southside Ashpo at an annual salary of $100,000. Is there a motion to that effect?
Chair Davis. This is Dr. Townsend Smith. We just need to add HRS 1 as well.
Thank you. And if we could add HRS 1 to that motion. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved. Reggie Keenan.
Motion by Mr. Keenan. Is there a second?
Second, Olivia.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Any discussion on this motion? Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz, Ms. Kamnitz, Mr. Keenan,
Yep, yes.
Ms. Kamnitz, Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain, Mr. Ford, Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Motion carries. Colleagues, this concludes our work for the day. I want to thank each of you, along with staff and presenters, that made this July 8th, 2021 meeting a success. Do look forward to us getting together back in person for our August meeting. Looking forward to that date. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this July 8th, 2021 meeting.
I make that motion, Olivia Oxendine.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine. Is there a second?
Second, Dr. Tipton Rogers.
Second by Dr. Tipton Rogers. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain, Mr. Ford, Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion passes. We stand adjourned. Have a good day.
Thank you.